Welcome to the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. I'm Shane Metlin here with Catie Harper, your JMU beat writers from the Daily News Record, to talk JMU sports, where we've got a ton going on. We relaunched this podcast last week, and I think it was good luck for JMU basketball as JMU women get a big win at home against Virginia Tech, bouncing back from loss at Texas and a more competitive home loss to Villanova. But 2 in a row for JMU women was maybe slightly concerning before they come back and beat the Hokies. And now 3 wins in a row for the JMU men heading to George Mason this Saturday. Mason undefeated in a game that's going to be broadcast on ESPN Plus, but also on TV in the DMV on Monumental Network. So plenty of opportunities to try to check that one out before JMU football takes the field. There may be a slight overlap towards the end of that basketball game. But you can watch that before a big football game this Saturday that we're going to talk about later towards the end of this podcast, previewing JMU Coastal Carolina. But that's just a quick recap of where JMU basketball stands before we get really football heavy here obviously the biggest time of year, so much going on, whether it be the college football playoff rankings. There's rumors of different things happening with coaches and players and everything all over the place, not just JMU. And like we said, previewing a big game at Coastal Carolina. But first off, again, like I was watching JMU basketball last night, kind of writing something up about that while they announced the playoff rankings again. And so, Catie, you got on the call with the committee. Didn't get to squeak a question in because, maybe they saw your affiliation or, maybe you were just that far down the line. Who knows? But didn't get to ask anything about the Group of 5 rankings. But let's just start there. Nothing changed as far as Group of 5, Tulane, the only team in at number 24. That itself, I think, is not the big question mark as much as like who jumped Tulane. As far as like what might be the Group of 5 representation. And let's just get your initial thoughts on it, because there's a lot of different directions we can go when we're talking about the selection committee and the rankings.
Yeah, I guarantee they saw my phone number and they were like, this is the girl that's asked about the G5 the last 2 weeks. We'll give her a week off. Because I raised my hand. I was going to ask a question. They didn't want to hear it. It wasn't necessarily going to be a JMU specific question this week. I felt like I had kind of hammered those home the last 2 weeks, but it was going to be kind of about what you just hinted there with the fact that over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that 20 to 25 spot in the college football playoff rankings. There have been some losses in those games, and teams have been falling out of the rankings. But what has continued to not change is, one, it's Tulane in the rankings with the Group of 5 level, but then they've also just stayed at 24. And that to me is very odd when you look at who won and who lost last week, and the fact that Tulane had a good win up at the Temple. Like, they won that game well, and they still sit at 24. No movement, even though teams ahead of them had fallen out of the poll. And when you look and see some of the teams that are popping in, I think there's a very fair argument to say, well, I don't know if that team is better than a JMU or better than a North Texas. So to me, that was my takeaway, was just that I thought it was odd that not that Tulane was still the highest ranked G5 team, because you can't really dock a team for a win, in my opinion, but it's the fact that they remain the only Group of 5 team to crack the top 25 college football playoff rankings when you look at the other polls and how high, a JMU is ranked, but then the fact that there are multiple G5 teams in those other polls as well.
Yeah, it's really, at this point, I overuse the word interesting all the time when I'm like, it's interesting, but like at this point, it's just like, it's transparent, like almost that, like they're only going to take one G5 team no matter what. They don't seem to really care who it is or where they're ranked. It's just like, we're going to slot somebody in at number 24. So like that question gets answered. And it's a twofold debate now for JMU fans. It's one, should JMU be ranked above Tulane and North Texas? And that, I think that's a healthy, lively debate that there's no real solid answer to. You can make a case for any of those three teams. But like now the frustrating part of it's got to be like, okay, there was a real possibility that like 2 group of 5 champions could be ranked above the ACC champion, depending on who that ends up being. And, you know, there's a real like case that like there should be 2 group of 5 champions ranked above the ACC champion if it's not, say, Virginia. And you know how much Virginia struggles with Virginia Tech, even when they're the quote unquote favorites in that game. Like it's just so obvious that like there was panic amongst the committee that might actually happen. So they slip SMU and Pitt into the rankings above Tulane, by the way, which makes absolutely no sense for them to jump Tulane this week of all weeks. It's just so transparent that they were just like, okay, yeah, we can't let there not be 4 Power 4 teams in the automatic bids. It's just, I mean, I'm not somebody who normally is just like, oh, this is obviously conspiracy, but like this is just clearly what they were doing this time around.
Yeah, I would have a hard time disagreeing with you there, because it's I don't think there are many ACC teams that are better than who could win the group of 5 level or group of 5 conferences. Like I really do think that I know there's been a lot of back and forth between Tulane, JMU, and North Texas fans. They're all very passionate about their school and their program. But I think there was almost like a unifying force last night when this poll came out, and even Tulane fans were like, wait, we're still the only ones ranked. It like you said, it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense when you think of the grand scheme of college football and what they're doing and where the moneymakers are and the brands. And I mean, I think you see it still with even how high Miami is ranked right now. With, you know, they lost to Louisville, which is apparently now not a good team. And it's a bad loss if you lose to them, but maybe not a bad loss if you're Miami. It's a lot of contradictions at times when questions get answered. And I think we've talked about that quite a few times, that, you know, what applies to this program when they're getting judged is probably not going to apply to this other program. Like they're almost judged on 2 different metrics. And, you know, sitting on this teleconference the last couple of weeks, I still don't know what the metrics are that they're looking at. Like it seems like they're being as vague as possible. So it's weird. And I think back to when I asked about the UTSA loss for Tulane, and they were like, well, yeah, that is a metric that we're looking at. I'm like, okay, but like, how heavily are you weighing it? Obviously, they're not weighing it that heavily because Tulane is still the group of 5 representative or the highest ranked G5 team right now. But it's these metrics that they're using. It just almost seems like they're cherry picking the metrics that help kind of those bigger brands almost.
Absolutely cherry picking, because I mean, you can like go back. I'll go back 2 years ago when I was getting on these calls like pretty frequently, and you didn't even get a consistent answer like about whether or not they were even like discussing JMU in the room when JMU was like technically not eligible, but there was a chance that they might become eligible any day. And like, you couldn't even get like a clear answer about if they discussed JMU. Like that was never consistent. So like the fact that they're not consistent now is just, you know, par for the course with them. But they make a pretty big deal in the offseason about how they're adding strength of record as like an important metric in all of this. Strength of record would not only help JMU when you're comparing them to Tulane and North Texas and these other schools, like it would help all 3 of those schools against teams like SMU and Pitt and others. Like, so they clearly are just not considering that like towards the bottom of the top 25, but they might be like around, you know, the top 10, like the teams that might get at large bids. It's just completely inconsistent. And then you look at the makeup of the committee, like, you got active athletic directors at UVA and Utah, 2 teams that are in the mix for this thing. Like that is pretty wild. And even if their own teams weren't in there, then we're talking about 2 conferences that are worried about how many, if any, at-large bids they might get and the money that comes from that. Like, I mean, there is some G5 representation on the committee. There's a couple of athletic directors from G5. There's a former Nevada coach. But I don't think enough to like outweigh the Power 4 um, just, interest in this, that like they don't want to give up the spots. And it's just so clear that they don't want to, even though it was designed to take the 5 best conference champions, whether that's includes the ACC or the Big 12 or not. And it's just something like has to change about how this whole thing is selected. I don't think it probably will, though, because, how are you going to do that when those programs and conferences hold all the power already?
I think that's exactly the right thought. I think that is 100%. And I've seen the discourse pick up over the last couple of weeks about, the G5 shouldn't even have a spot. It should be all about rankings. They're just going to go in and get like their butt kicked, which I mean, you look at what happened last year. Ohio State beat the brakes off of Tennessee, which is an SEC program. Like, blowouts are going to happen. And one of the other things that has been brought up on this teleconference time after time, which I think is starting to maybe be questionable, is they keep mentioning the eye test and that they are watching these games and they are making their opinions by watching these games. And I've taken heat for saying that JMU, I think, is the top G5 program right now. And a lot of it is because I'm sitting here, I'm watching these games every single week for JMU. And when it comes down to it, and I'm not saying JMU could win a playoff game, but when you watch and use your eyes to look at the defense, I don't necessarily think if they go into one of these games, it would necessarily be a blowout. And I think that's kind of why I have a problem with people saying that the G5 shouldn't even be in the playoffs, is because this is a very, very good defense, and they've done what it has needed to be done all season. And that's why, to me, last night they kept saying, "Oh, we're watching the games and we're using the eye test." And I think a lot of people, that was when it was unified on Twitter, was like, "Are you though? Like, if you're watching these games, then how is this your top 25?"
Yeah, it's also like kind of like interesting that they went from, in the BCS days, being completely computer oriented. There was like basically no human element to it. So now it's completely, these 12 people get into a room and decide everything. And people complained about the BCS, like, obviously, and now people are like, oh, we got to bring back the BCS style. Maybe there's like a way to combine the two, like have this poll be one component of like maybe the BCS formula or something. But I think the biggest problem with the old BCS too was like you were letting the computers pick 2 teams to decide a national champion. If you're letting them pick 12 to decide a national championship, like you might actually end up with a legit national champion, like in the end through a tournament format. Like, but right now it's just, I don't think anybody's really satisfied with what we're getting in college football, unless you're, Georgia or Ohio State, where you can kind of sit back and watch all this and know you're in and wait till it's over. But yeah, the whole system seems to be completely broken as far as like how you choose this playoff. And I think you can go back to every other sport. In men's basketball, Mississippi Valley State, the absolute worst program in the country year in, year out, starts the season with a path to the national championship. And like they can earn it. And, it's not the same in college football. Like, only one team from the group of 5 conferences like can do it. Even if they like, do everything right throughout the season, they may not have a path to a national championship. Like, I think you solve a lot of problems first by just having every conference championship champion in like a 16 or a 2014 playoff. But that's a completely different discussion. But like the way they're choosing it now, I think at this point, everybody's pretty clear that this is not the way to choose this playoff.
I mean, I think everyone at the group of 5 level,
Yeah.
I think maybe those big conferences and the fans are pretty happy with how this is playing out. But it's just, even last night's teleconference, I don't know if any of our listeners have like gone and read the transcript of this call. It was rough. It was a lot of hypotheticals, which it's not on the fault of the committee. Like, there were just people getting on the call and saying, well, if this team wins this game, I think one example was like, if Michigan beats Ohio State this weekend, would that jump them up into the playoffs? And the committee's like, well, we're not here to predict the future. Like, we're not going to kind of entertain those hypothetical questions. So that was a lot of it. But then it was such a vague call at times. And I know I said that earlier, but I don't think any of us left that call with like a lot of clarity on the situation. And I think there were also some tense moments too, where this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that I think they may be applying different standards to different teams. Brett McMurphy at On3 got a little tense at one point in the call between him and the two representatives on it. He asked about Ole Miss and if Lane Kiffin announces that he ends up leaving Ole Miss, does that hurt them? Because no one has seen them play without their head coach. Is it not affected because that's just like an uncontrollable thing that happens? But then I think, you look at it now with North Texas, they're losing its head coach. And well, is that going to keep them out of the top 25 if they continue to play well, or even if they win the American Conference, is that going to keep them out? So that's why I'm like, the call last night was just interesting, and there were so many different facets that were being applied at different times that it just seemed like it seemed like a lot of human error, which obviously I think there is the large possibility of that heading into the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And, you say that like, maybe it's just a group of five like that doesn't like the system, but I kind of disagree because like we're focusing on that debate, but like the teams that want to get those at-large bids and the conferences that want to get those, I don't think they necessarily like the way this is going either. Like they may like the end result if it's your conference, but there's a lot of concern about like how that's chosen too. We're focusing on the quote unquote bottom end of it, but I'll just add one more thing about the committee itself. The head of the committee, who just got added because Baylor's got another scandal going on, is the active AD at Arkansas. And there's a former AD at Arkansas on this committee. Can you imagine if Arkansas was actually good this year and in the mix? Because it's just insane that this is how it is set up. Like, so that's my last little bit about the committee itself. But
I have one more thing to add about the committee, and it has nothing serious to do with the committee itself. Hunter Yurachek, though, who we're talking about, when you Google him, you know how like they'll give you a brief bio of the person and what they're known for?
Yeah.
According to Google, he is an internet personality.
Okay. Well,
it's like, okay, athletic director, nah, internet personality.
Maybe what you become when you take on some of these jobs. Well, the playoff discussion won't matter at all if JMU doesn't go down to Coastal this weekend and take care of business there. What to expect from the Chanticleers this week where, there's some question about, their quarterback. I think it's maybe not even much question. I don't think Samari Collier is going to be back for this one against JMU. And Coastal was pretty much a different team when he was their quarterback. They started winning a lot of games, was extremely unpredictable on offense because he could take off and run pretty much at any time. A little bit like if you want to compare him to another Coastal Carolina, it was almost like a super version of Ethan Vasco as far as that ability to scramble and things like that, but even better at it. What to expect from Coastal this week where in the grand scheme of things, as far as like the Sun Belt race and everything, this game doesn't matter much. We know who's playing a championship game. We know that JMU is going to claim being Kings of the East again and all that stuff, but will we see a big time effort from Coastal as they try to avoid getting blown out by JMU for the fourth straight year?
Yeah, this because of the holiday, I was finishing up the game preview this morning, and not gonna lie, it was not the most fun to write it before the availability reports come out because, as you mentioned, I talked heavily about the quarterback situation. So, may have to go back in tonight once that availability report comes out and change some wording if things are if it's a definitive answer about the status. But yeah, when you look at this Coastal Carolina team right now, not a lot of eye-catching numbers, which maybe has been the Coastal Carolina story since Tim Beck took over that program. They're kind of at the bottom of the conference in both offense and defense, yet they were winning for a while and in that conversation for the Sun Belt East title. And then, injuries happen and they fall off. And They took a very bad beating to South Carolina last week, obviously losing their quarterback. So it's makes it a little different or a little difficult, but it's hard to see JMU maybe not having a performance that it's had against Coastal over the last couple of years, just because it doesn't seem like there's all of that stuff that could maybe throw them off. Obviously, the coaches have been very complimentary of Coastal and what they're capable of, but even their defense is a little different this year than what it was last year. Alonzo Barnett said it's, completely different, but even that, it's kind of similar to ODU, and they all talked about it. And JMU did really well against ODU's defense. So I think JMU is built to play well against this Coastal team. It's more so just getting out on the field and executing the way they probably should.
Yeah, and I do kind of get the feeling that this is a JMU team that wants to go down and make a statement down there. They seem to be still pretty locked in. Obviously we haven't seen how they reacted to the rankings last night or anything like that. But so far we haven't seen any indication that those things really affect their preparation or their mindset going into these games. They really just want to go out, win every week, and maybe win impressively most weeks if they can, and see where they end up at the end. And they do know that winning a conference championship, finishing 11-1, 12-1 is a remarkable accomplishment that would make them among the best teams to ever put on a JMU uniform. I think there's a lot of pride in that from this group, this coaching staff. And like I said, just from my view, they seem to be locked in when I don't know that every team necessarily would be locked in for this game this week, given the situation.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it there. I think there is a lot of pride of being the first team to make it to the Sun Belt title game, and they want to make sure they're heading into that game on the right foot and with the right energy behind them. Because, and I know we kind of touched on it last week, when I talked to a lot of these guys before the season, guys who were on the team last year, that Sun Belt title, that is kind of goal one for them. They weren't necessarily, did they talk about the college football playoff? Sure. They talked about it ahead of the season, but the biggest kind of milestone for them was getting that Sun Belt title. A lot of it too was, hey, we won our bowl game last year. We got that out of the way, but that Sun Belt title is still eluding us, and we want to change that. And I think Coastal can help make sure this team is kind of where it needs to be before either facing a Troy or a Southern Miss, depending on how that game plays out this weekend. But yeah, I don't think they've been a very focused team all year. I think that's something that we've kind of talked about at practice. I know I've talked with Dave Rickard about it. He has said that he thinks this is probably the most focused JMU team he's been around. And I can understand where he's coming from with that. When you listen to an Alonzo Barnett, we kind of, we got him to joke around this week at the press conference about Thanksgiving after and kind of what he would eat. But before then, he's talking about the game. He's talking about what he needs to do better and why, he feels like he's in a better place now from his watching a film. But this group right now they're pretty focused. And I think that is something that has continued to benefit them and allowed them to win game after game ever since that Louisville game.
Yeah. I think too, obviously there's tons of turnover in college football these days, and there's a lot of guys who haven't been in JMU very long, but guys like Alonzo Barnett, Jacob Thomas, Wayne Knight, there's a good number of people who are major contributors to this team that have been in the Sun Belt for a long time, and they hear the somewhat disingenuous argument that when JMU wants to say they're the best program in the Sun Belt, people will respond, "You haven't even won a conference championship," which they arguably were the best team in the conference at least one, maybe two of the years that they've been in the league. I think there's some people that really want to shut up that argument. To be honest, I think that gets it thrown out there, and what else are you going to say about JMU football going forward if you're another Sun Belt fan, if they go out and dominate a conference championship this year?
Yeah, I will say I saw an ODU fan on Twitter say that about JMU. I was like, oh, they haven't even won the conference. I'm like, well, pot and kettle. I mean, you haven't either. But that one made me laugh. But I think there are a lot of guys that still, you mentioned Jacob Thomas and Alonzo Burnett and Wayne Knight. they remember. Well, Wayne wasn't on the team, but he had left by that point. But they remember that 2023 season and kind of, fighting for what they, honestly earned and probably deserved at that point with how good they were. But I think this goal for two guys, I would say for a Jacob Thomas and a Trent Hendrick that know, as Coach Chesney has said, the sand is running out in their clock. They know that this is their last chance to get it and get that conference title. And so I think it's really, really important to them. And I think there's a lot on the, I don't want to say there's a lot on the line this weekend because there's still going to be that conference title game, but I think there's going to be a lot of excitement in this game too. I know we talked yesterday about the feature I did on Wayne Knight. He's, under 50 yards from becoming JMU's first 1,000-yard rusher since Percy Ajayi-Obase in 2019. So that's going to be a big deal. We were informed the other week at practice by Morgan Suarez that Cristiano Rosa at the time was like 6 kickoffs or 6 touchbacks away from being the program record or program leader. However, we're not 100% sure how accurate that was because I don't think it was in the game notes. So we don't know. We're just trusting the specialist on that one. But this is a group that has a lot of exciting things that they want to play for and they want to earn. So I think there's going to be a lot of fun stuff that they're going to be looking forward to going into this weekend to hopefully then push that into the conference championship week.
Yeah. I think just back to even, you talked about the 2023 team. Even early in the season, they played Troy coming off the first King of the East season where they go 8-3 in their first FBS year and they don't get to play in the conference championship game. There was so much talk even then. It was like, oh, this is the real Sun Belt championship game. Like after, Troy won the league and there was pride in it then. Obviously this is a different coaching staff, but I think that's just the overall mentality around the program and the people who have been around for a little while. Cause there are people even beyond the players, like a Matt Transu, like been through both of it. Like there are those people who I think are really, really amped up to play and possibly win the conference championship game.
Hopefully if Chris Brooks listens to this podcast, I texted him about this. Speaking of people who have kind of gone through it both, I really want to talk to Eddie Whitley, who's the cornerbacks coach, because he was on Signetti's staff for several years and he didn't get moved with them to Indiana. They kind of, they left him behind. Coach Chesney told us, gosh, probably back in his first spring, I want to say it was in the spring and not his first fall season, that after he talked with players that it was pretty clear that those guys wanted Coach Witt around the team and they wanted him on staff. And he was pretty much like one of the first people Chesney knew that he needed to bring back because of what he did for the program. So I think of people like that as well that kind of go into that Matt Transu category who have gone through this transition, who have, you look at Coach Whitley specifically, he's coached some really good cornerbacks and he's coached them to a high level. And I think that is probably very exciting for him to be in this position now to help lead his guys into this game.
Yeah. So I guess before we wrap it up, any just overall thoughts on JMU at Coastal, what to expect from this one? I bet you have a lot of driving in front of you as you head home for Thanksgiving, then back and then down to the Myrtle Beach area. So, before you make your trips, like what to expect this weekend from JMU football?
Yeah, it'll be a nice early Saturday morning on the road, slightly later start than the Marshall game. So there is that. But I've heard some people say maybe it's a trap game, and I can see where that maybe it will come up because it is a game that I think JMU should win, and they should probably, win it, maybe matching some of these past games over the last couple of years. But it's one that I think if they go down there and they play their brand of football and the defense does what it does, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a tall ask for them to win this game because I think this JMU defense should be able to handle Coastal Carolina pretty well.
Yeah. Well, that'll go ahead and wrap this up. Another episode of Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media and the Daily News Record. Also, be sure to check out another new show we have on this feed, Postscript. That was me and Catie again this time. I talked to Catie about her feature on Wayne Knight, and that's what that show is going to be. Just a little discussion with a DNR reporter, hopefully each week, but fairly regularly, about a story that they wrote and were proud of, or wanted to kind of dig into the reporting process. So if you're at all interested in kind of how the journalistic sausage is made, you can listen to that one and check out future episodes of Postscript. That'll be coming into your DNR media feed if you're subscribed here on whatever podcast apps you use. In the meantime, I'm Shane. This has been Catie Harper talking JMU Sports, and thanks for tuning in.